My name is Brandy, and this is My Digital Story, a biography of a person with mental illness. I will share the experience of Jeff Spinks, who has a diagnosis of anxiety disorder and obsessive compulsive disorder. Jeff Spinks agreed to an interview on his experience as a person with mental illness. Jeff is 46 years old and is diagnosed with anxiety disorder and obsessive compulsive disorder. The purpose of this video is to understand what OCD and anxiety disorder is and how it affects those who live with this disorder. Jeff hopes his experience will help others who struggle with anxiety and OCD and offer them hope through his recovery. Anxiety disorders are the most common mental illness in the U.S., affecting over 40 million people ages 18 and over. Anxiety disorders are highly treatable, but only 1/3 receive treatment. Risk factors include life events, brain chemistry, genetics, and personality. People who suffer from anxiety disorder may experience fatigue and sweating, irritability, racing and unwanted thoughts, insomnia, nausea, and abnormal heartbeats. OCD was once considered a rare mental disease, but now affects 2.3% of the population between the ages of 18 and 54. Although many people suffer from OCD, less than 10% receive treatment. And even though OCD is prevalent in all ethnic groups, both men and women, in children OCD seems to be prevalent with boys. People with OCD may experience compulsive behavior, repetition of words or actions, anxiety, depression, or repeatedly going over thoughts. Jeff was diagnosed with OCD at age 35. He was not immediately diagnosed with OCD because symptoms of his depression overwhelmed symptoms of the anxiety disorder. When asked what made him seek treatment, he said he began having intrusive thoughts and repetitive actions and extreme anxiety. And all that anxiety was attached to not following through with his thoughts or actions. His life was becoming unmanageable, and he was unable to cope with simple daily tasks. He decided to seek help through his family doctor, who referred him to a psychiatrist who later diagnosed him with the anxiety and OCD disorder. At first, he was reluctant because he felt, as a grown man, he should be able to manage his own thoughts and emotions. Because of the stigma attached to mental illness, he almost did not seek treatment. When I asked him if something triggered his mental illness, Jeff believes in part he is biologically and psychologically vulnerable to these disorders, but he does believe they begin to manifest in early childhood. Although he grew up in a loving home, his dad had just started to build his company, and there was anxious behavior modeled in the home. People responded to his father with fear and anxiety, and Jeff began to mimic that same anxious behavior. Jeff also experienced severe childhood sexual trauma at the age of 8, which he kept secret until the age of 17. According to the American Psychological Association, children exposed to traumatic life events are 43% more likely to be diagnosed with a mental illness in adulthood. Jeff also suffered from a severe electrical accident, which led to anxiety due to PTSD. Jeff attributes his recovery through mental illness to several forms of treatment. He has used pharmacology by taking psychotropic medication to help ease the symptoms of his anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder. He has also used therapy and mutual aid groups where he can talk through his issues and find a solution. He has accessed organizations such as NAMI. He has also built a strong support network of friends and family and those who suffer from similar mental disorders. He uses cognitive behavioral therapy, which helps individuals develop a new way of thinking about obsession. Instead of thinking that obsessions must mean something horrible, he realizes obsessions are just that, obsessions. He has also used behavior modification, or the social learning model, and the premise of that model is that behavior is learned, but it can also be unlearned and replaced with behavior that is more socially appropriate. In order to fight the labels and stigma associated with mental illness, Jeff talks openly about his challenges, and he's willing to share his personal experiences with others in hopes to encourage people to not feel shame and seek treatment. He feels that it is important to educate himself and others on mental illness in order to become a better advocate, and he is compassionate and empathetic towards those with issues and is willing to reach out to those in need. Jeff continues to live a normal and healthy life with a mental illness diagnosis. He is a father, a son, a brother, a friend, and a productive member of the Greenville community. He actively engages in his mental health recovery, and since his diagnosis has improved his happiness and overall quality of life. He is still the same person as he was before he was diagnosed with his mental disorder. Jeff's experience of learning anxious behavior in childhood relates to course material in connection with the social learning theory. Attached to anxiety disorders, it combines both cognitive and behavioral learning. Jeff observed anxious behavior through his role models, and then through his environment retained the behaviors and then mimicked the same behaviors. As the anxious behavior continued throughout his life, Jeff began using worry to cope with the stress caused by anxiety. This led to obsessive-compulsive behaviors. Later in life, cognitive behavioral therapy and behavior modification became important forms of treatment in recovering from anxiety and obsessive-compulsive disorders. Some critics of the social learning theory argue that social learning theory ignores a person's biological state, and it ignores the differences due to genetics. This would argue that Jeff's response to anxiety with an increased heart rate or nervousness would be a biological response from the nervous system and not a learned response from his environment. It also would not take into account Jeff's personality, which asks the question why some people respond differently in the same or similar situations. So in response to treatment, behavior modification, it would have no effect or little effect on a personality change. What I have learned is every year, 42 million Americans are diagnosed with a mental illness, including anxiety, OCD, depression, and bipolar. Risk factors of mental illness include life events, brain chemistry, genetics, and personality. Still, many go untreated or undiagnosed. But what I have learned in my interview with Jeff is that treatment is available, and those diagnosed with a mental illness can live happy, normal, productive lives. By sharing one's personal experience, it empowers others to do the same and reduces the shame and stigma associated with mental illness. Managing and living with mental illness is an achievable goal, and a person with a mental illness is a person and not their mental illness. And this concludes my biography of a person with mental illness.